guys. This is our running. This is our post-service recap for Sunday morning. We had a nice little service this morning. Started out with our kind of sharing time where people have an opportunity to bring their psalm, hymn, spiritual song, or what have you. And we heard some nice testimonies about speaking in tongues, about intimacy with the Lord. Some people shared kind of prayer requests, things that they would like prayer for, whether it's entering into studies as September is now upon us, or issues going on at work and so on. So we were able to pray together, to worship together, and it's all good. It was all good. And then in our discussion, we were talking along the lines of what makes a mature disciple of Jesus. And one of the things that we talked about last week was a mature disciple recognizes the authority of Christ. And so those of us that were here last week, and perhaps you, if you watched last week's recap video, kind of committed to saying a short prayer on a daily way that recognizes the place and the authority of Christ in our lives. So someone's prayer was just, God is King. The one that I used, and I think a couple other people used, was from Thomas à Kempis, what thou will, as thou will, when thou will. And so we just talked about how that went over the course of the week. And for me personally, it was something that kind of brought in a little piece of peace each time I prayed the prayer. Someone was mentioning the kind of the difficulty of praying that kind of prayer, though, in a situation where you really want to see a particular outcome, where you really want to see God come through in a certain way, makes sense. The hardest place to surrender to the will of the Lord. And so this week we continued the discussion around discipleship, talking about what it means to put our faith and our trust in God. And one of the distinctions that we made is kind of between treating God as an object or like a machine, or treating God as this person or at least a personal being. And I think we treat God as a machine when we believe that if we just make the right inputs, then we'll get the right output. And so for us, using Christian kind of spiritual language, we can think like, oh, if I just pray the right way, have the right level of faith, go to the right church meetings, live with the right level of holiness, then I'll get the outputs that I am hoping for. When in actuality, treating God in this personal kind of way is far more dynamic and I think at times far more messy. But trust in God means trusting in the personalness of God. Trust is a personal, relational type of term. So we started to talk about the ways that in which we can deepen our trust in God, deepen our faith in God. And one of the things is to be able to be vulnerable with God. If you think about the way that trust works in our personal lives, in our interpersonal relationships, often trust is developed over time, and it's developed when someone is vulnerable with us and when we're vulnerable with that person. And so in our relationship with God, in our connection with God, being vulnerable and authentic with God, I think is an important thing. Like last week, we talked about particular practices that we might try over the course of the week to just continually deepen our trust in God. So we talked about things like practicing silence before God or just listening before God. Talked about a regular habit of just connecting with God through praying in tongues. Talked about just asking God for faith, asking God to deepen our trust in Him. Devotional reading, regular prayer and talking with God, declaring God's goodness. And so the idea is that each of us is going to pick one of these things and just try to make it a habit over the course of the week, whether it's the short prayer, whether it's the devotional reading, but aimed at deepening our trust in God. And this isn't some mechanical exercise that we're trying to do. We're trying to do these things to really facilitate our intimacy with God, to facilitate our relationship with God. Because I think trust in God comes out of a place of knowing God, not just knowing about God, but knowing God. So trust follows from intimacy. So the question of how we develop trust is in some ways parallel to the question of how we develop intimacy with God. So those are the things that we talked about this week. I'm going to open up the registration for next week. You can go ahead and reserve a spot. And it's hard to believe. Next week we'll already be in what will be like September 13th. And this is Labor Day weekend. Just wild. The way time works is wild, isn't it? All right, guys. Bless you. Bye.